I found it buried in an old, crumbling journal, bound in leather that had nearly turned to dust. The pages were brittle, written in a hand that was both strong and unsteady, as if the writer had known time was running out. The name inscribed on the first page was clear: Eirik the Stormborn. I'd read plenty of Viking sagas before, but this wasn't just a story, it was a warning. Eirik spoke of a village deep in the fjords of Norway, a place called Skaldvik. He had not been born there, but he had seen its fate with his own eyes. And what he recorded, it should not have been possible. It all began with a storm unlike any other. The sea turned black, waves rising like grasping hands. The wind howled through the mountains, carrying voices that did not belong to the living. Thunder didn't roll, it screamed, shaking the ground beneath their feet. The villagers prayed to Odin and Thor, but the gods did not answer, because they had done something unforgivable. 3 nights before the storm, warriors had returned from the east, their long ships heavy with plunder, gold, silver, weapons. But among their riches was something different. A chest, sealed in iron, covered in runes that no man in Skaldvik could read. Eirik wrote that the village elder, Gudmund, had begged them not to open it.
Some treasures are meant to be buried,
he warned.
There are things older than the gods themselves.
But warriors are proud, and greed is blind. They broke the seal. Inside lay a single object, a drinking horn, black as midnight, carved with twisting figures that seemed to writhe under torchlight. They called it a gift of fortune. But Eirik wrote that from the moment the chest was unsealed, the air changed. The cattle grew restless. The dogs howled at nothing. And at night, the villagers began to hear footsteps outside their homes. Footsteps that did not belong to any man. And then the storm came. And Skaldvik was never the same again. Eirik's words became sharper after the storm arrived, his script rough, as if his hands trembled while writing. He wrote that Skaldvik did not sleep that night. The storm raged outside, wind and rain hammering against the wooden walls, but it wasn't the weather that kept them awake. It was the feeling, the creeping sensation that something stood just beyond the firelight. And then, Asgeir disappeared. A hunter, one of Skaldvik's best. He had left at dusk to check his traps beyond the village. He should have returned before dark. But he didn't. Not until midnight. Eirik was there when Asgeir finally stumbled out of the trees, his cloak soaked, his breath visible in the freezing air. He moved slowly, stiffly, his limbs awkward, his posture unnatural. At first, no one spoke. Then, someone called to him.
Asgeir?
He did not respond. Then Eirik noticed something. His boots left no footprints in the mud. A gust of wind pushed back his cloak, and his hands came into view. Blackened, frozen, fingers curled as if gripping something unseen. That was when Gudmund appeared. The old man did not ask questions. He only whispered a single word.
The Augur.
The dead who walk. Then Asgeir moved. Not like a man. No, it was a jerking, unnatural motion, as if something inside him was forcing the body to work. His mouth opened, too wide, as though his jaw had unhinged. And he spoke.
It is a witch.
The voice was not his own. Then Eirik saw them. Beyond the tree line, just beyond the reach of the torchlight, figures stood among the branches, unmoving, watching. Dozens of them, tall, gaunt, their skin the color of frostbite. Their eyes burned blue like the last embers of a dying fire. None of them breathed, none of them spoke. But the wind carried a whisper.
You You should not have taken it.
And then, the whisper laughed. Eirik's writing changed after that night. The words became sharper, more frantic. There were sections scratched out so violently that the parchment had torn. Whatever happened next, it wasn't just a story. It was a massacre. The storm did not end, and Skaldvik did not see the sun again. The Draugr did not move at first. They watched, their hollow eyes fixed on the village, waiting. Then, one by one, the torches went out. Not by the wind, by something else. A presence, a force. The warriors of Skaldvik, men who had raided foreign lands, who had bathed in the blood of their enemies without flinching, felt fear. They raised their weapons, but the Draugr did not fight. They did not charge, did not scream. They simply walked forward, and Skaldvik began to crumble. Eirik wrote of Vidar, a man built like an ox. He swung his axe at the first Draugr that approached. The blade struck, but did not cut. Instead, Vidar's body froze where he stood, his limbs locking in place, his breath escaping in a sharp, pained gasp. His skin turned pale, then gray, then black, and in the span of seconds, he collapsed into dust. There was no time to react. The Draugr moved through the village, and everything they touched withered. Men dropped their weapons, their screams stolen from their throats before they could fully form. Mothers clutched their children, only to watch them slip from their grasp, pulled into the dark by unseen hands. The houses rotted in seconds, the wood collapsing in on itself, as if the village had existed for centuries too long in an instant. Eirik ran. He didn't lie about it in his journal. He admitted his fear, admitted his weakness.
I did not fight.
He wrote.
I did not cry. I only ran because I knew. You cannot kill what does not live.
He and a handful of survivors made it to the cliffs, looking back only once. Skaldvik was gone. Not burned, not destroyed. Gone. The land where it had stood was nothing more than blackened soil, as if the village had never been there at all. Only one thing remained. A single black drinking horn resting on the cold ground, untouched by the wind. And then, just as the storm had come, it stopped, and the Draugr, they were nowhere to be seen. But Eirik wrote that he knew the truth. They weren't gone. They were waiting. The surviving villagers, what few remained, stepped out into the ruins of Skaldvik. The longhouses had rotted overnight, their wooden beams collapsing inward, as if centuries of decay had passed in a matter of hours. The paths were gone, swallowed by the earth. The farms had withered, the livestock vanished without a trace. It was as if Skaldvik had aged 1,000 years in a single night. Then, the ground began to move. Not an earthquake, not a shift in the land. Something was breathing beneath them. Gudmund was the first to sense it. He dropped to his knees, pressing his hands to the frozen dirt.
It's still here,
He whispered. No one questioned him, because they all felt it too. Something was awake beneath the ruins of Skaldvik. The villagers ran. They did not pack, did not gather their dead. They simply ran. And by the time they reached the cliffs and looked back one last time, Skaldvik was gone. Not burned, not abandoned. Gone. The land where it had stood was nothing more than blackened soil, as if the village had never existed at all. Only one thing remained. A single black drinking horn, resting on the cold ground, untouched by the wind. No one ever returned to Skaldvik. There was nothing to return to. The survivors never spoke of it again. The name Skaldvik was erased from stories, from maps, as if the village had never been there at all. But Eirik wrote that some curses do not die so easily. Years passed. He had traveled far, raided distant lands, tried to forget. But some nights, when he sat alone by the fire, he could still hear the wind whispering through the trees. At first, he told himself it was just his imagination. Then, one night, he saw them, standing at the edge of the fjord, barely visible through the mist, watching. Their eyes still burned blue, their bodies shrouded in shadow. Eirik did not run, because he knew the truth. They weren't gone. They had never left. And then, from the darkness, a single figure stepped forward. It lifted something in its hand, something Eirik had seen before. The black drinking horn. And then, the wind carried a whisper.
You should not have taken it.
The figures vanished into the mist, but Eirik knew this was not the end, because the horn was still out there, and as long as it existed, so did they. Eirik's journal did not end there, but something changed in his writing. The words became shorter, less certain, as if he had begun to question whether writing them down was safe. The final pages were not about Skaldvik itself. They were about the drinking horn.
I have tried to destroy it.
He wrote.
The fire will not take it. The sea will not swallow it. The earth will not bury it. It is not meant to be unmade. And yet, it is meant to be found.
His last entry was unlike the others. No description, no date. Just a single line, scrawled in jagged strokes across the bottom of the page.
It is waiting for the next fool.
And then, nothing. No record of what happened to Eirik. No mention of where the horn went. Just silence. I don't know if he succeeded in hiding it. If the horn is still out there, buried beneath the fjords waiting. But I do know this. If Eirik was right, then Skaldvik was just the beginning. And I still have more of his stories to uncover. This was only the first of Eirik's tales. There are more entries, more horrors buried in these pages, and I intend to go through them all. If these stories truly are real, then the past is not as dead as we think. If this story left you with a lingering chill, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next entry from Eirik's lost journal. And tell me, if you uncovered a forgotten Viking relic, would you leave it buried or take the risk of waking something that should have stayed asleep? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching Cabin of Whispers. See you next time.